everyone. Welcome to the Contensis user webinar about making your site more accessible and with an introduction to WCAG 2.1. My name is Jon Maskrey. I'm a UX engineer working in the Contensis development team. There's a lovely picture of me, etc. But let's get on with it. So this is what we're going to look at today. So who benefits from accessibility? We'll have a little look at the UK law for making your website accessible. Check out some of the WCAG 2.1 rules and the guidelines, and have a look at how you can not interpret them, but easily see what you need to do. Look at the basics for compliance, so checking out how you can build your sites or make your sites accessible with the sort of least work, I guess, and how to test your site, so how to go through and audit your site and make sure it does actually come up to the standards set by WCAG 2.1. So what's the first section? So why are we making our sites accessible? So who's benefiting from this? Let's have a look at some stats. So at least 1 in 5 people have got a long-term illness or some sort of impairment or disability. So in the UK, that's 14.1 million disabled people, and that's 8% of children, 19% of working age adults, and 44% of pension age adults are actually disabled in this country. And on top of that, many people have a temporary disability or a situational disability. This is a great example here. It's taken from Microsoft's Inclusive Design Toolkit. It's a lovely illustration of how disability is more of a spectrum, and it can be permanent, situational, or temporary. So, for example, here, going from the top, we've got touch. You may have only one arm, which is pretty permanent. You may have an arm injury, you may have broken your arm, or you may be a new parent and you're holding a baby in one arm, and so you can only use a website or a mouse or a keyboard or something like that with one arm. And again, for sight, you may be blind, you may have cataracts that I guess can be removed or replaced, or you may be a distracted driver. I don't think that one's really based on websites, because hopefully you won't be browsing a website whilst driving, but that's probably more to do with the UI of car controls, that kind of thing, and designing for that. Hearing, you could be deaf, you may have an ear infection, or you may work behind a bar and it's really noisy and you can't hear stuff properly. And that's speaking, so you may not be able to speak, you may temporarily not be able to speak because you've got laryngitis, or you may have a heavy accent and look like a Viking apparently. I'm not quite sure why, but I guess these are sort of things for like smart speakers and that kind of thing. You have to take this into account. I'm lucky. I've been healthy most of my life, but looking back, there's definitely been times when an accessible site has benefited me. A few years ago, I broke my collarbone on my dominant side, so I had to use my mouse left-handed and rely more on keyboard navigation. I also had an issue with one of my eyes. So my right eye had a leaky blood vessel behind it, and it sort of some fluid built up in there, and it made it hard to see low contrast colors in one of my eyes and made text distorted. And it's also like situational time. So I wanted to watch a video on my phone, but I don't want to disturb people around me. So having captions turned on helps with that. So I guess the point I'm making is creating accessible websites benefits quite a wide range of people. It's not just an afterthought for a minority. So who is responsible for accessibility? Well, the short answer to this is everyone involved. So anyone who's got a touch point on your site. So content writers, designers, developers, editors, basically anyone who can make a decision on the site can impact accessibility. So let's have a look at the law. Now, the accessibility regulations came into force for public sector bodies on the 23rd of September 2018. and that was for new websites, so new builds. Sites that already existed needed to comply by the 23rd of September 2020, which was last week, I think. And there's also, in that time, there's an update from WCAG 2.0 to 2.1, and I think they had there's some timescales around that as well. And it's all a bit complicated, but it's not complicated now because all these deadlines have passed. So now all public sector websites need to meet WCAG 2.1 AA guidelines. They also need to publish an accessibility statement that explains how accessible your site is and what you're doing to make it accessible if it's missing in certain areas. To help with this, here's the first of the links that we'll post up on Slack afterwards, so don't worry too much about it. But you can go and get a sample accessibility statement from the government's website to sort of help you just change the wording and add your specific things in there for your site. So I keep saying WCAG, said it a few times now, but what's it stand for? So it's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and they're an internationally recognized set of recommendations for improving web accessibility. And they're based on 4 principles: that your site is perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And let's go through those in a bit more detail. So start off with perceivable. So can users actually recognize and use the site with the sensors they have available to them? So can a visually impaired user understand non-text content like video or images? Is it easy to navigate and use with a screen reader? Can a user easily increase the text size without breaking the layout? There's many more things, but these are just some examples. Number 2, so operable. Can users find and use the content regardless of how they choose to access it? So can keyboard users navigate the site without getting stuck? Is it obvious to screen readers where the links go? Are the links descriptive? Can keyboard users see what element is currently focused and interact with it? Number 3, understandable. So can users understand the site's content? So is that content understandable to the target audience, as in plain English? If abbreviations are used, are they explained? Can screen reader users understand what form fields are for? Are they labeled? And lastly, robust. So can the content be interpreted by a variety of technologies? So obviously a web browser, but things like screen readers and other assistive technologies. So is it valid, well-formed HTML that a screen reader can actually understand? Does assistive technology know if some sort of status has changed on the site? Does it tell the user? Does assistive technology know what components do and what state they are in? So is there a modal window open or is it closed? That kind of thing. There are 3 levels of compliance within this. So all the A's. Single A is the most basic, and AAA is the most strict or the most nuanced. You can kind of look at it like single A is essential stuff that will stop people using the site completely if it's not there. AA is kind of ideal support, and AAA, it can be more specialized support. And it's AA that's the minimum according to the UK law. And to attain that, your site needs to meet both single A and AA. And this is a good compromise. It satisfies the majority of accessibility needs, but it doesn't place undue sort of burden on the site owner, because the AAA stuff can be quite specialized, which you can still do it, but maybe if you're a video site, you may want to meet AAA and actually not only have captions for your videos, you may want to have someone signing the videos as well. It's that kind of thing. So where can you find these guidelines? It's this link to the WCAG 2.1 quick ref pages. This is what they look like. It really is a fantastic resource. It's not necessarily the easiest read, especially if you're new to accessibility. But it's got a lot of things that help you. So it's got filters at the side that help you sort of break it down into smaller chunks. So if you have a look down here, you can actually filter it to single A, and it might be worth doing that and having a read through those, and then building on top of that with double A. You've also got these links by each of the rules to help you understand. So if you click through to these, they go into more detail about the guideline and often give examples of best practice of things like that. So let's have a quick look at those. So here's the one for understanding contrast. So it gives the rationale behind it, techniques to actually fulfill it, and exemptions as well. And all of these have these extra links, and there's a lot to read, but it really does help you understand the actual guidelines themselves. Now, yeah, I'm just going to scroll through this, or the video is going to scroll through. There are a lot of these guidelines. They're broken down very nicely, and as you can see, you can have a look at single A's, double A's, and all that. But it's not going to be, there's not enough time for me to go through all of these, and you probably don't want to hear me talk through every single one of these. So I can outline the basics of what you can do to maximize your compliance. So that's what I'll do now. We'll start off with semantic, well-formed HTML. So this is the base level. This is the thing that everything's going to hang on. And I can't stress this enough. Using correct semantic elements to mark up your pages are going to cover off so many accessibility issues. So things like the correct use of headings, well-structured forms that have got field sets, proper labels, and proper buttons, all that kind of stuff will mean the browser deals with a lot of accessibility itself. HTML is really, it's accessible by default, and it's usually the decisions we make in design, in code, and writing content that are things that can make a site inaccessible. So we're just going to have a look at a simple example that I put together. It's a really basic web page with a pretty standard layout. I'm sure you've seen a million of these before. We've got a header, content area, sidebar, and a footer. And visually, you can see the different sections, and at a glance, get a feel for what the page is all about. It's been marked up with divs and classes. So we've got a div with a class of header for the header and so on. So we can hook the styling into that. And yeah, it looks fine, but doing it this way doesn't give the assistive technologies we want to be able to use, such as screen readers. It doesn't give them much of an idea of how it's structured. But we can help with that. So we can help by using semantic HTML5 elements instead of these pretty meaningless divs. Semantic HTML5 elements, they're elements that actually have a meaning. The div element is really just a divider. It's just, it doesn't have any meaning itself. You just dump content in there. So let's have a look at the kind of things we can use. Okay, so we'll start with a header. It's an element that typically contains a logo, search, navigation, that kind of thing, and it's its own proper element. So you no longer need to use a div for the class. You can add a class to it and style it differently, but that's fine. The nav element, so this is something that will contain your links to the rest of the site, or you could have a second one on this page that goes to different sections of the current page. The main elements, so you have one of these per page, and it contains the dominant content of the actual page. The aside, so we've used a aside here for indirectly related content. So we've used it to mark up a sidebar in this example. And I think you get the idea here. We've got a footer element, yeah, for footer stuff. And obviously none of this really makes much difference to sighted users. I mean, just by looking at a website without seeing the code, I've got no idea what elements are being used to mark up the content. I can see the main content, the header and the footer and all that sort of stuff. But it makes a big difference when we use assistive technology. So this is a visualization of VoiceOver on Mac OS. It's software that allows visually impaired users to read and interact with apps and websites. So it reads out what's on the page, basically, and allows you to interact with it. And by using semantic elements here, the assistive technology like this now know the purpose of the different areas of the page. And we've done nothing special to do this, but VoiceOver users can now know the sections of the page without having to read the entire contents of it. There you can just skip to the main content. And the same goes for headings. So again, as a sighted user, I can see what this page is all about. I can see the importance of the big heading and the sub ones. I can see which ones are subheadings and subheadings of subheadings and so on. And we've marked these up as H1s, H2s, 3s, and so on. And again, that helps assistive technologies like screen readers, screen reader users to actually navigate your page. So again, we've got VoiceOver here, and that will read out a list of headings if you wanted to. And so a user can very quickly understand what's on the page without having to read through all, and they can jump onto the section, straight to the section they want to read or they're interested in. And that's just done by structuring the headings correctly and in order. And the same goes for form elements. So we've got a search here, so we've got a search text field and a search button. And again, you can jump into this menu in VoiceOver and it will read out each form element on there. So it's a great quick way for visually impaired users just to jump to the search element if they just want to search the site. And again, same for links. So you can flick through all the links on a page. And this highlights the importance of having a meaningful text for linked. So you can see here, if these were being read out to you, you'd know pretty much exactly what's going to happen, where you're going to go when you click on one of them. If we do a bad example, as a sighted user, I can work it out. I can see the context in which these read more links are in. But if I'm relying on a screen reader reading them out, all I'm going to hear is read more, link, read more, link, read more, link. I'm not going to understand where that's taking me without having to go through the rest of the content. And let's not forget keyboard users. So by default, interactive HTML elements can be navigated to and interacted with using only a keyboard. So you can see here, this is an example of Chrome, just going through tabbing, basically pressing the tab button and going through the elements in Chrome. And that's great for users that may have reduced motion control, or even, as I've done many times, forgotten to charge the mouse and it runs out, and all of a sudden you've got to tab through your website to finish your tasks or to finish reading something. And yeah, the default browser focus state we see here, it's kind of like a fuzzy blue sort of ring on these. It's not the most best looking of things. And it does show at the moment when you click on stuff as well, so which is a bit counterintuitive, but it's very tempting and easy to just actually disable this style in CSS, so it looks nice when you click on stuff. But by doing that, you make your site inaccessible to keyboard users. So always make sure, well, at the very least, make sure you don't disable it. But it's usually best to actually apply your own styling to this, because different browsers do show it in different ways. This is Firefox, and this is the default active state, the default focus state. It's actually on the blog link here, and it's that sort of dotted line. It doesn't look great, it's not that obvious. So yeah, style it properly, and you'll help out keyboard users. So that was a bit about semantic HTML. So we've had a look at that, and yeah, we've seen HTML is accessible by default. And it's usually stuff we do in design development and content that can make it inaccessible. We've seen that by using semantic HTML elements, you're going to help screen reader users. It's the same with proper heading structure, and just don't disable your focus styles. So let's move on to color and contrast. So this sort of thing we're going to look at here is text contrast, also the contrast of interactive elements, and look at color to provide meaning. So text contrast. So it's the ratio of the foreground color to the background. So the lower the ratio is, the harder text is to read. And I've put a couple of extreme examples on here. So we've got black text on a white background, which has got a contrast ratio of 21:1, which is lovely. It's very noticeable. You can read it easily. White text on a white background has got a contrast ratio of 1:1. So that's the worst. It's invisible. You can't read it. And the WCAG AA requirements for this are 4.5:1 for small text and 3:1 for large text. And it gets a bit complicated with the large text, small text, because they explain it in points, which you then have to convert to pixels or something that's a bit more obvious. So basically, large text is text that's over 18.66 pixels that's bold, or it's text that's 24 pixels in regular weight font. That's classified, and over, classified for the large text. Everything under that is small text. So here's an example, and it applies on any element. So here's the example of one of the buttons from Contensis. We've got white text on a kind of tealy background, and the contrast ratio here is 4.56:1. So that meets the AA criteria. And as I said earlier, this applies to non-text contrasts as well. So it also applies to UI elements, and this is a new one, well, newish, but this came in WCAG 2.1, and it means elements like form fields need to have a contrast ratio of at least 3:1 to the background color. So the example we've got here it's an interactive thing. It's an input, so text field, and that border is the thing that needs to have the correct ratio. And that's got a ratio of 3.03:1, so it just squeaks through here for AA compliance. Just as a quick aside, this is the tool I used for this. It's quite good. You can put in your foreground color, your background color, and it'll tell you if you pass AA or AAA, and on normal text or large text, and also graphic objects as well, like we just said. And it will allow you to adjust them. So if you find that it doesn't pass, you can make it, make the dominant color darker or lighter, depending on which way around it goes, and work out the best color to use. So pretty useful. Other tools are available, but this is what I use for this. So lastly, on color, color shouldn't be used as the only visual means of conveying information or indicating an action or distinguishing some sort of visual element. So the example here, let's say we've got a list of pages, and we're going to be reviewing these pages, and we've got indicators to show whether they've passed, they've failed, or are yet to be reviewed. So green's passed, red's failed, and the grey, it hasn't been reviewed yet. So if a user has issues with color, like any other sorts of color blindness, then it's not necessarily going to be obvious what the statuses are for these pages. As I said before, I've had that problem with my eye, and it has left my right eye with some issues with color. So if I close my eye, my good eye, look at that, I can't easily differentiate between the gray and the green. It looks very similar to me. I can just about do it. So just to prove the point, let's remove the colors. There you go. You've probably not got much of a clue about what status each of those things are. Little aside, if you're a developer and you're just in the middle of developing a site, add this little rule for CSS rule, and it will make your whole site grayscale, black and white, so you can tell and just do a quick check to see if things still make sense without color. Obviously, don't put that in your rules for your live site, because it'll make your live site black and white. But yeah, use your Chrome DevTools or whatever to check. So what should you do? Well, you've just got to use something else. So in this example, I've changed from dots to icons. So it's still got color, but it's differentiated with more than just color now. So if we remove the color from this, you can still see that the home page has got a tick next to it that's passed, about it's got a cross, and there's a dash for contact us. That's most likely not been looked at yet. So just to recap, color and contrast. So yeah, check your text contrast. So use one of those tools that are online. I'll put a link in Slack later. Also, you've got to make sure you check your UI contrast. So for stuff that's interactive, and make sure you don't rely on color as the only means of conveying information. So we'll have a quick look at alternative text. So this is for non-text content and often needs to be described with text for visually impaired users. And this will be for stuff like images. It may be things like buttons that are only have an icon in them and don't have any actual text, video captions, that kind of thing. But we're going to concentrate on images for this because it's the big one. It's what you've most likely got loads of in your site. And they will often need to be described to visually impaired users. But it's not quite as straightforward as it might seem. So we're going to have a look at some different examples using the same image here. So got a lovely dog here. If there's no alt text specified in it, so we can see that the image tag here has only got a source attribute. There's no alt attribute being put in for this. When a screen reader comes across this, such as VoiceOver, it can read out the only thing it can, which is the file name. So the screen reader will read out Eduardo Ghetto -lb underscore, I'm not carrying on writing this, but dot unsplash.jpg image, which is pretty long and it's pretty useless. It doesn't describe anything to do with the image. You can also put in empty alt text. So we've got an empty alt attribute on this image. And if you do that, the screen reader speaks nothing. It ignores the image completely. It's as if it's not there, which, as we'll see in a bit, is not necessarily a bad thing. And here we go, we've got some descriptive alt text here. So the brown dog is yawning in the park, and it's an image. So that's what the screen reader usually speaks. So no, you don't really need to write in as your alt text image of a brown dog in a field, because the screen reader will then say something like image of a brown dog in a field, image. So you'll double up. So just write what it is, what it sort of explains. So we've got those images there. We've got different ways of doing alt text. Let's have a look at them in different contexts. So let's say you've got a blog post about your lovely dog. And it's a personal blog post about your lovely dog's named Rex. So you may have some sort of alt text like Rex the dog looking happy in the park, yawning in the park, that sort of thing. But if we change the context of the page, but you still have the same image, you'll see that you may not necessarily have the same alt text. So let's say we're using the same image in a photography blog this time, and it's talking about creating dynamic photos. You may have something slightly different. So the alt text may be dog laying in the grass with the foreground and background blurred. You may be describing some sort of photographic technique with this on top of what the actual subject is. And just to push that a bit further, in the case of a news article list, images quite often are put in here, and quite often can be used more for decoration. So in this example, we've got a news listing with a few things in here. And the first one is dogs banned from the common. And we've got a generic picture of a dog there. It's not directly linked. It's not a story about this dog or anything like that. And anyway, a screen reader user would probably not want to have each image read out to them as they're scanning through a list of links. Especially if there's lots of them and there's, you put in proper good descriptions. They just want to know what it's about, where it's linking to. So in this case, you can give the images an empty alt attribute, So that makes them completely ignored by screen readers, and the screen reader user could just go to the information they want and click through to that link. And this applies not just in listings, but you may have sort of decorative images scattered around your site that don't provide any information or meaning, but are just there to look nice. So there's not really much point in describing all these in detail to screen reader users. So give it an empty alt attribute and they'll ignore them, and it'd be great. It just helps them out. So that's alternative text. So yeah, always remember to include the alt attribute for images, otherwise you just get the file name read out to you. Be descriptive, but be aware of the context an image is being used in. So make sure you change it depending on where it is and what context it's in. And yeah, remember, it's fine in some cases to use an empty alt attribute for hiding decorative images. I'm going to talk a bit about adaptable text here. So this is kind of allowing the user to use a device with the settings they want. It's a fairly simple one, but basically use relative units for sizing text. Text can be used, can be sized using a variety of different units. We've got things like rems, ems, ch, percentages, and of course pixels. I'm not going to go into the detail and differences here because it doesn't matter for this, but they're all relative units apart from pixels. Users quite often will set a different size font in their browsers or sort of on their operating system, OS wide. So if they have problem reading small text, they'll bump it up. And sites that set the text size in pixels often override that user preference. So they'll think they're making it bigger, but it actually won't get any bigger. And the WCAG guidelines state that text should be able to be increased up to 200% without breaking anything. So be careful with pixel values for text. And if you are using proper sort of relative units for text, it's also worth thinking about using relative units for other dimensions too. So it's all great and well and good allowing the user to resize their text, but if you're resizing it, but the padding, margin, and width of the columns it's in don't resize in proportion to that, you end up with sometimes like a broken sort of layout, or you may have text cut off that you can't read. So in this example, the text is resized, but the layout hasn't because it's set in stone, it's set in pixels. If you set both text and the layout padding and margins and stuff with units that are relative to the text size, then it all scales up with each other and allows you still to read things properly. So that's adaptable text. So basically, don't use pixels to size text, and use units relative to the text size for padding, margin, width, and height. So those are the things that you can do. They're sort of the very basics to help you get quite a high level of accessibility on the site. There's a lot more you can do, but this is just an intro to it. We've not got time to sort of go through absolutely everything. But let's have a look at how you can test what you've got at the moment. So how you test it and what you can use to help you with that, because as you've seen before, there's quite a massive list of things to check. We'll have a look at automated tests, we'll have a look at manual testing, and extensions of manual testing. So automated testing, you may have all seen things like this. So automated testing can be done with remote tools that scan your site and give you a report of what's right, what's passed, what's failed. You can use browser plugins and that highlight areas of the pages that don't comply. But with all these, there's one thing to remember, is automated tests can only cover so much, and they're great for things that are easily comparable and measurable, like color contrast. You get a number back. They can tell very easily if you're missing alt text, and if your heading structure is a bit wonky. But they miss quite a lot of other areas. I think possibly they can only check around, I don't know, between 40 and 60% of accessibility issues. So it does leave quite a big hole to actually check. But we'll have a look at these. They've still got their place. They still point out obvious mistakes. You can have some of these automated things built into your build. So when you're creating new areas and developing new areas of the site, it won't build unless it passes all tests. So there's all sorts of things you can do. So they do have use. Let's have a look at a couple of examples. So first up is the Wave browser plugin. I was trying to find an inaccessible site, and I think I literally just Googled inaccessible sites or something. And the University of Washington have put together a purposefully inaccessible site as a demonstration, so they can do before and after. So I thought that'd be quite a useful thing to look at for these. So this is what it is. And yeah, we'll have a look at the Wave plugin, which gives you an overview and an overlay of your issues and where they are, which is really useful because you'd have to dig around code and manually check all these. So you can see here we've got 21 errors, we've got 7 missing alt texts, we've got 13 missing form labels. You can see we've got contrast errors there, and we've got some alerts of suspicious alternative text. So I don't know, maybe it's picked up that there's I don't know, the file name in the alt text or something like that. It gives you the overview of the structure of the page. And yeah, big red problem here. The page has no heading structure, so there's no headings in this page, so that's bad. And yeah, they've got a whole tab to dedicate to contrast, and you can see they've got that same tool. It's made by the same people who made this tool here. And notice it's black and white now because I've clicked the desaturate button, so you can actually desaturate your page and check it still makes sense, to check you're not relying on color. They can do things like turn styles on and off as well, which is really useful to make sure, again, that your site makes sense even with no styles doing anything. So if you've got headings in there, you'll see it making sense. If you haven't, it looks funny and you can't quite read it, and you're jumping around a lot. So it's quite a useful tool. So that's Wave. Also built into Chrome is Lighthouse. And it's built into Chrome DevTools. There's lots of other things in there that you can check, like speed and how good it is as a PWA and things like that. But it does do accessibility. And you'll see it's picked up the same sort of stuff on here. So images without alts, form elements without labels, that kind of thing. And it gives you a nice score, which is great. It's really good when you've got a site and you get a nice 100% accessibility score. And yeah, it makes you almost feel like you can sit back and job well done. But it's 100% of the things that it can check, and that certainly isn't 100% of everything. And even says here, it's pointing out you've got additional items to manually check. So you may have a perfect score, but your site may be unusable for certain groups of people. So always remember that with automated testing. So manual testing. You should do this alongside automated testing. I mean, it still will help you because you'll find lots of things with the automated stuff. But as I said before, there are a lot of rules to check. So you kind of do need a hand with this. I mean, I certainly do, and I rely on this tool. Weirdly, it's kind of another automatic checker in a way. It's called Accessibility Insights for Web, and it is really good. It is so good. Again, it's a web browsing plugin, and it does the same sort of things. You can do what they call a fast pass check, and it's an automated check, so it'll pick up all the same things we've had picked up before with the other ones. But on top of that, the thing that differentiates this is you can do a full-on assessment. So use a drop-down, go to assessment, and what that does is it kicks off all this. So on top of your automated stuff, gives you a really comprehensive list of manual actions to go through and tick off. So you've got a lot of sections and subsections you can go through, and we'll choose one here. So we've got keyboard navigation one here. It gives you information on what you should be doing and gives you step-by-step instructions. So can you navigate through the interactive elements here using tab and shift tab to go backwards and forwards? Do you get stuck in any keyboard traps? Can you get to one area but can't get back out of it without using a mouse or something? And it allows you to record whether they pass and fail. And also, if you do fail it, you can put a little note in there and say, oh, it failed here, or it was mostly okay, but this bit got stuck, that kind of thing. And you can put in lots of different instances of fails, which would be useful, as I'll show you in a second. On top of that, you've got this little information icon by the keyboard navigation title there. And if you click that, you get more information on the reasoning behind the checks, so why it matters, how to fix it, some examples of passes and fails. And if you scroll down a bit, it also links back to WCAG success criteria and this additional guidance. So it's so useful and so comprehensive. I recommend this highly. And there are a lot of tests to go through here, and I've just done some quick ones in here. So it'll summarize what you've done and show the passes and failures in the certain areas. And you can also export the results of this. So you can go through this yourself, export the results and pass it to whoever's interested. So hopefully you can pass it to your team as developers to then go through and fix. So really useful, means you don't need to keep reading through the WCAG stuff and learn it by heart. You can just follow this checklist and read up on any areas quite easily that you don't understand fully. So kind of extending on that theme of manual testing, learn how to use a screen reader. They'll give you an invaluable insight into how visually impaired users use your site. So I've mentioned before, Mac OS comes with VoiceOver, Windows 10 comes with Narrator, but there are others that are available. There's NVDA and JAWS. They do all work in a similar way, but slightly differently. I'm quite used to the Mac OS one now, because that's what I use generally. But you do have to learn them, and they're usually just very short key commands to do certain things. Like you may have key commands to jump from one link to another and just go through all the links in the page or all the headings in the page. You can just get to read out the whole page, or you can just sort of keyboard navigate through every paragraph and thing, and it will read it out. Or you can just press A and read all. There are lots of ways to use it. It's really worth it while learning that. And then turn off your screen. So open up your screen reader, open up your website, turn off your screen, and can you quickly work out what the page is all about that you're on? Can you navigate through your site? Do the links you're going through now still make sense? Can you perform actions and get feedback and know what's just happened? So if you're on a search results page and you type in a different search term and hit enter, do you know if anything's changed? Does the screen reader read out, oh yeah, searching for this, oh, you've got 3 results back, and then you can easily read them out? Does it tell you that sort of thing? Really useful, because you can do a lot with making a site accessible, but then it's not necessarily easy for screen reader users. So well worth looking at. And finally, with again a further extension of manual testing, is testing with disabled users. So it's all very well and good using assistive technology yourself. So yeah, you've learned to use a screen reader, you've turned your monitor off and you're going through your site, but you already know your site most likely. You can work stuff out. Nothing beats actually testing with real users. So there's places that can help with this. Places like the Digital Accessibility Centre. They can provide testing services. So they've got a range of users that have visual impairments, dyslexia, mobility impairments, learning difficulties, and you can take people through different scenarios and what you want them to do, and they'll test your site and test certain user flows, that kind of thing. And they also provide training and consultancy. So you can have your developers maybe developing a new section of your site. They can be, take it to these guys and they'll review it at regular intervals to make sure it's being built in an accessible way. So yeah, that's how to test. So use automated tests. They'll give you the quick wins and pick up simple issues. Manual testing on top of that for full coverage. Really great, learn how to use a screen reader and test with it. And if you can, see if you can test with actual disabled users. So that's it. We've gone through the basics of WCAG and how we can sort of apply it to a simple site. But I mean, that really is scratching the surface. These are the very basics. There's a lot more you can do. And it is, making things accessible is a journey. It's hard just to get it right and do it all at once. And we all know the web could be a much more complicated place than the example I've given you. You can have highly interactive components that need more work to make them accessible. Certain components will need JavaScript to make them actually properly accessible. There are other things you can use, other technologies like ARIA, which stands for Accessible Rich Internet Applications, and there are a set of attributes that will extend HTML to make it more accessible with assistive technologies. So I hope you found this useful. And the plan is for this to be the first in a series of accessibility webinars. So we want to cover more areas and in more detail in future. So yeah, let us know afterwards what sort of areas you're interested in and what you'd like to look at. So thank you very much. Here's that list that is probably not much use because the URLs aren't the easiest ones to remember. So I will copy and paste this all in text into Slack afterwards. So thank you. Back to you, Anna.